So I have been confronting the world, assuming a certain vantage point on the topic we're going to talk about today. And this is kind of what I do in general. Like if a new idea kind of congeals in my space, I'm an actor, I'll kind of try it on as a worldview and be like, all right, let's say this is a real thing. It seems potentially real. Let's start looking at the world and see how often it checks out. If I can find my rule of threes, that sort of thing. So in looking at the world this way, I always get caught in the maelstrom of like, is this really happening? Or is this Bader-Meinhof, AKA blue car syndrome, where I just bought a new GMC and so all I do is see GMC cars everywhere. However, I'm starting to be like, wait, this might fully be real, because it's just this week. I've been blocked. I've been blocked by 3 people on social media. 1 on Twitter, 2 on Instagram, 2 like relative strangers, you know what I mean? Like internet people, and 1 person I know from the real world who I've known, acquaintances, not good friends or anything like that, but like known for a decade at least. And it so frequently came from, to me, the crux point, which really started to make this worldview make sense to me, questioning. Even the act of questioning seems to provoke in some people a response of immediate rejection and dehumanizing of the person asking questions, which I find, as a person who loves to ask questions, is actually one of the primary ways in which I learn as a human being. I find highly troubling and potentially like damaging to a widespread degree. And this started really with 1 person on Twitter. I literally asked 1 question, and I'm going to paraphrase as close as I can, where I said, someone posted a meme saying, well, what's a better argument than this? And I was like, well, actually, interestingly, that's also an argument for the opposite point of view. Or isn't that, I think I said, so a question mark. Blocked. And I got to tell you, that has happened quite a few times where people just straight up block. Now, everyone has their own, I think, relationship with blocking. I'd love to explore that. We kind of did a little bit in cancel culture episode. But to me, I find it personally deeply, somewhat vaguely stressful, deeply dehumanizing, because to me it says, to me, you are not worthy to even speak to me. It's a talk to the hand moment, to take it retro hack comedy. I don't block people who are spitting while they're talking and not making any sense on the street. Like if a apparently schizophrenic human being came up to me and started blathering to me about how Magic Johnson never had AIDS, but he was infested by demons or whatever, I don't block that person. You know what I mean? I'm just using them as an example of like, oh, here's a person who's never going to be reasonable or whatever. And I have over time, because I've been blocked by many people, sometimes instantaneously, sometimes over an expansive, like a spread of time, constantly have to examine, okay, well, I'm a common denominator here. I have over time, absolutely, concretely, objectively made my tone more winsome, asked more questions because people seem to want to have that. Try not to do a flurry of links, with people who I'm just freshly engaging with. Whereas normally I'd come in and be like, here's my claim, but here's why I'm saying these. Here's 3 examples as to why I'm saying this. I thought it was helpful because I'm like laying out all my cards, being intellectually vulnerable. But I've modified my tone, my vernacular, tried to use simpler words because people kept talking about my vocabulary and that I was using a thesaurus, which I do not use. That I found that very offensive. Anyway,
I think you memorized the thesaurus.
And I think you're only allowed to use the thesaurus in songwriting, poetry, that sort of thing. I actually think it's cheating, almost any other case. Or if you get really stuck, you pull it out in emergency. But I was like, anyway. So I've been confronting this very concretely. And so I say all that to say it's been wounding me personally to kind of be rejected for asking questions. And it has increased my sense of alarm as to like the phenomenon perhaps being even more widespread than I originally thought. But that's only within a week or two of really putting this on as a worldview. But what are we talking about today, Andy Swindler?
Well, Brendan McNamara, we're asking the question, is woke a religion?
That is a totally classic episode in the making, literally. That's right.
Yeah. Oh my God. Like right now.
Right now, it is actually happening.
We got to spoof that Spaceballs scene one of these days.
We got to. Oh, so let me just briefly say, that's what I know. That's a weird way to speak. That's how I tend to speak anyway. I've been thinking very concretely. So my immediate supposition is woke appears to me to be religion pretty functionally. I think I mentioned this in the anti-racism episode, as anti-racism was like very religious in its construct, being myself a religious person. So I don't say that as like, well, how dare you be religious? I am deeply religious. But it carries over even to potentially, I was like, I'm starting to be like, wait, is woke a cult even, as I'm trying this lens on? But that's in 1 week of experience, and I have so much less experience in this realm, and so I'm excited to hand it over to you for an extended bit of time. Whereas, and I know you can talk through whether you even feel about that identifier, where I feel like it's been used and used and used, and now we kind of know what it means, but we don't. But we sort of. But it is kind of it's in the ether, it's in the zeitgeist as essentially what it does describe. But you are certainly more in that world or adjacent to that if it is a religion. So my evaluation is certainly from the outside, speaking to people within, and then having these experiences. So I just want to get us rolling in the realm of the personal, and to also let people know I do have feelings and they can be hurt.
We're here to humanize Brendan.
Yeah, I'm a person.
Yeah, and I think this absolutely ties to our cancel culture episodes. So there may be some loop backs there. To address your opening, I think, I believe we're here because of curiosity, right? And we both are, I think, deeply embodied, curious people. And I also think questions are weaponized, can be weaponized. Mm-hmm. They can be in bad faith. They can be provoking somebody or provoking a known trauma. They can just, I think a lot of what I hear from folks who are marginalized, who have spent a lot of time explaining things, particularly to, let's say, white folks in this, or in the language we've chosen in this podcast, lightly melanated folks such as ourselves, that they're just fucking tired. They're just, because they've answered that question 100 times. And so sometimes, I'm not saying that's the reason, I'm not saying it necessarily justifies what's happening to you, but that's something I hear pretty commonly, that at this point, they're just exhausted. They're just like, I can't answer that question again. Go look it up, go ask somebody else.
Yeah. What's an example? What's an example of a question, like a question that would be asked hundreds of times, like an exhausting question?
Let's see. I mean, one that, I'm working my way through My Grandmother's Hands by Rosamund Menachem, and he just pointed this out. It's a whole culture. It's a whole chapter actually about like kind of rebuilding white culture and anti-racist culture. And he points out just the question, like let's say, this is actually a great example because it's all about the moment of awakening, or like the moment maybe somebody starts to become woke or walks down that journey. And it's very common, and I'm sure I did this back in the day. The first thing is like, oh wait, I understand that I have privilege, or I understand that the world is inequitable. I understand that you have hardships that I don't. Tell me what to do about it.
Yeah.
Tell me, the person with more power and privilege, what to do about it. That's often like gets a lot of pushback.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Well, not always.
Yeah.
I have friends of, I'm in the diversity, equity, and inclusion industry. So there's tons and tons of, deeply melanated folks and other marginalizations that are devoted to that work and that do spend all day, professionally kind of teaching more privileged folks what to do and how to learn and all of that. So anyway, that's one that comes to mind.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I'm glad I asked, because that's a good example of something that is both enormously religious, right? Because if someone would ask that question of a person, then I would assume that same person is the person who's delivering the message that the circumstance that someone is enlightened about even exists. So then that's very religious, right? To sort of speak of the conviction of an innate sense of wrongness, right? So in that would be very typical of how that's how evangelical Christianity works. And I say evangelical, I know for some people, evangelical can mean the sort of like political movement. It isn't that, or it is that only in a very, very recent in human history fashion. So I ignore it because I'm a semantic conservative. So evangelical just means literally like you go and tell. You literally tell people, you evangelize, you go, hey, here's the truth. You in and of yourself are sinful, imperfect, and that has enormous consequences, most especially between you and God, but also with other people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like you like lay it out, and you can even sort of like functionally be like, well, I don't think that's true, and then you can kind of walk people through an explanation to enlighten that revelation like you're talking about. But then classically, that's exactly the response you want from someone, is to then in religion. So that's how what you're talking about is extremely religious, because it's evangelically proclaiming something that is a fundamental flaw with someone else, that you, I guess in religion, you'd be saying this is the fundamental flaw of all of us. So I don't know, in your case, it might be slightly altered, but it's similar to a religion. But then classically, the exact thing you want is to someone say, this is throughout the Bible too, okay, what must I do to be saved? And then you're like, yes, good. That's exactly the question I wanted to ask. And then you would typically be like, oh, here's what you do, that you have to repent for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. You must turn from yourself and sort of rely on the perfect sacrifice of Jesus Christ, right? In the evangelical framework. But here you're saying generally, so this might be interesting. This would be a division of labor, like bishops, priests, ministers, or something, if it's a religion. But if that would be for some people a question that they would then say, go, like sort of go and learn, right? Which is a little more Zen, right? That's like a fundamental principle of Zen, is like, don't, what is it? You must know all things for yourself. I'm paraphrasing, but like, don't take it from a teacher. Don't take it from a book. You must go and like learn this thing, which is, I'm totally down. Cause again, it's like similar to what you like, which is embodying, and I do the same thing with worldviews or points of view, as well as embodying as an actor, or as I've done this week. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to put this lens on and go see if it's true. Kind of like experientially. So anyway, I just thought I'm glad I asked you that question, because that was really, so in some ways that's very religious, and in other ways it would be highly unusual for a religion to then be like, when someone asks, that you're like, don't talk to me about it, or whatever. Or like, oh, I can't answer that question. Because to me, that would be exactly the question you'd want someone to ask, is like, how do I not be this way?
Right. And I think part of what's happening there is that it's kind of like an intervention in like at least a knowledge immaturity, if not an attitude and behavioral immaturity, where I mean these conversations, particularly let's talk about racism. I mean, these conversations are not new. And you go back to James Baldwin or even earlier, like, and that, I think that was part of my experience, was just, there was a sense of like, oh wow, just because I heard about this thing must mean it's new. And obviously, like, we grew up in the 80s, so I don't know, that was kind of a strange period, just a little while after the civil rights, kind of the, I guess, formal civil rights movement. But that was often, people refer to that as a period of color blindness, where we were essentially told like not to see color. And so even in that and of itself, I think there's a piece of this wokeness or just cultural I don't know, signatories, if you will, of well, how should we be talking about this now? That seems to be kind of an overriding thread through all of this, is like, how ought we to be talking about this? in that case, usually the criticism of being colorblind is like, well, we hadn't fixed it yet, so we can't sort of skip over it, and just if we don't see color, then we don't see the human, then we're not seeing their melanation, and we're not seeing maybe. But on the other side of that is like not tipping to the other direction, where we just assume all of those things about them, where we just see some, a dark-skinned person, and we suddenly just assume all of these things about their lives. Because I think that's one of the things I think is so valuable in general, and that's what we're here to do, is interrogating our beliefs, our programming, our behavior. To me, this relates to consciousness, and which I feel like is usually, in the ways I've experienced it, kind of evolved out of New Age. And there are parts of that are very, very valuable in terms of like knowing ourselves, and how does our brain chemistry work, and how do our bodies work, and what in spirituality. And there's a lot of really good work to unpack, a lot of just self-awareness, as broadly as possible, right? Now, I've often judged those circles, let's say, for not being woke. I've softened on that, just because I think the other side of this interrogation that's not so valuable is policing each other. And I think that's one of the things you're getting at with the questioning, or with some of the things you encounter out there, in the wild lands of social media. And it happened to me, I don't know, a couple of years ago. I think I had posted a Jordan Peterson video on Facebook, and we don't need to launch into that rabbit hole. I think there are some valuable things about Jordan Peterson, and some problematic things. He is human. And this video in particular was just about psychology. I mean, he's a very gifted teacher, I think. And
And that's his bail. I mean, that's literally his degree. His degree and decades of experience. Yeah, it's what he does.
And I'm aware of the controversy about things he said, and his commitment even to things like pronouns and trans people. I want to rephrase that. That I would say most people would say he's not committed to things like pronouns and trans people. Again, not to go down that rabbit hole right now. No. What bothered me is somebody showed up who I would say is very much in kind of woke, progressive, politically correct culture, and just made a total character indictment. And I was like, I can't remember how I responded, but it was sort of like in the vein that you're talking about. I was just like, hey, thanks for checking in. Like, I'm curious, like, are you talking about this video in particular, or Jordan Peterson in general, or just, there was no purchase there for an actual conversation. And then she eventually unfriended me. It was like, oh, okay.
Okay.
And like the most generous thing I can offer is that she felt that was an act of protecting herself. That somehow this conversation was so triggering, or I can imagine some people just being triggered by Jordan Peterson. Maybe that was it. And yet that's very sad to me, because that's the antithesis of, I think, what we're trying to do here, in just find things we can interrogate and learn.
And how to actually allow room for expansion. Fear, we've talked about many it comes up in everything. Fear is a powerful it's a powerful response, and it can trigger all sorts of behavior that is both reasonable and unreasonable. Oh, I want to go back though to one thing you were saying, because you brought up James Baldwin, who I adore. Almost, I had even a weird semi-obsession with James Baldwin, especially in, not for me in the 80s, but and obviously it was after his prolific years. But I read everything he'd written in the 90s, like mid 90s. And then it was awesome too, because I got kicked out of a couple of schools. So I skipped second grade, but then I had to sort of repeat half of a year near the end of my high school experience, because of getting kicked out and missing school and stuff. And I got to do AP English language, which is so I got to do 2 AP Englishes. And my awesome teacher, Dr. Wheeler at University School Nashville. Shout out Dr. Wheeler, if you ever hear this. I appreciate you and love you, and you affected my life in so many ways. So shout out to awesome teachers. She basically designed a whole curriculum just for me, because I was the only person having to kind of repeat. And I was like, I already did AP English. I want to do something else. She's like, well, there's this option. So AP English language sounds like a sort of grammatical semantic thing, which would be totally my bag, but it's not. It's actually sort of inclined towards nonfiction. So she designed a whole nonfiction curriculum just for me, which featured works. And she was like, who do you like? And I was like, well, with James Baldwin. She's like, oh, if you like James Baldwin, you like Joan Didion. If you like Joan Didion, blah, blah, blah. So I got to read him in that. So I got to study him academically, as well as just read his writings. And I would say similar, he brought up a lot of similar things. I would say the one thing that is transformed in the present examination of race is the idea that's much closer to the religious. And he was steeped in religious culture in his youth or whatever. Go Tell It on the Mountain is semi-autobiographical and kind of about sort of moving out of religious awakening into, you know, a consciousness of self, is the inherent nature of some of these problems. So like the language of like whiteness, meaning having all these things to do with inherent characteristics of racial identity, or even in some ways, we've talked about this too, almost using a racial term to mean a non-racial thing, but I don't think that's tenable, because it's too broad, it's too big of a proposal to actually make that functional in the world. That's like color blindness, you know what I mean? You're getting way too ahead of yourself to do that. So, but it proposes like an inherent or original sin, you know, of privilege. So then I'd say that's the kind of big leap that is, I think, very new. It's a very new concept to sort of suggest anyone is inherently, especially in this thing, inherently wrong or bad because of something related to their race or color, other than in supremacist. Obviously, we've had that in supremacist language throughout our entire lifetime and the lifetime of humanity since race was invented. But it is so much like original sin, with this strange caveat, which I find the most troubling, is, but some people have worse original sin than others in that sense. Like everyone has privilege, right? So everyone has original sin, but you as a member of a particular caste of society have more sin. So that's troubling to me. That's to me where it gets into religion / culty, where it's it's honestly what I see this too, because I've seen this in Christianity, where some people communicate the message of Christ as like, we are without sin, you are the sinful one, the sort of the you pointing sin, as opposed to the message of the gospel, the message of the Bible is we literally all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. There is nobody, there's none of us are excluded. Like, I'm not excluded, you're not excluded. If you're the bishop, if you're the pope, if you're the whoever, you're not excluded from that categorization, you know. Now there are people who do things or whatever, you know, that you've murdered people and I've just thought about murdering people or whatever, you know what I mean? That we acknowledge pragmatism, but that's a very interesting alteration or a new addition that I think has taken something from cultural examination potentially into the realm of religion. Sorry, anyway, I thought that was cool. I love James Baldwin, and anytime I can talk about that man, he was just so smart, man. And we don't have public intellectuals like that right now. It's so funny. There's so much talking all over the place, but like, I think because at the time it was so much, airspace was so much more limited, the people who would rise to the top and kind of be frequent like talk show guests to talk about not just like, oh, what's your latest project? Let's play a game. But like, oh my gosh, talk about life and reality and do so in a way that was like kind of funny and witty. You know what I mean? It felt like you were at like a party of like literary geniuses every time James Baldwin, you know, smoked and relayed his pontifications on the world.
Well, yeah, and this is funny to me because this is an area where I'm sure a lot of people listening to this, as I have, I think, picked up a lot of the, you know, cultural tenets of wokeness over the years, and I'm questioning that a bit right now. You have not, at least in sort of anti-racist woke culture, and yet here we are. Like, you've actually clearly read more Baldwin than I have, and you did it at an earlier time in your life. So I just want to point that out as just, you know, I just think that's worth pointing out. Yeah. So I feel like there's just a few things I jotted down in terms of like let's build the structure for this a little bit more. Yeah, we've thrown out a few terms. You know, one of them we've mentioned a few times, religion.
Yeah.
Religion and cults. And religion, I think it's worth coming up with some kind of definition for that or boundary for that. But cults is a little easier. Actually, one of my mentors a few years ago said, well, you know a cult by how they treat you when you try to leave. Which I appreciate that definition of a cult.
Yeah.
A lot of what is going on here around the tribalism and maybe almost desperately wanting the group wanting to hold people in so that we remain a group, because
sure,
it's terrifying
totally
group to dissipate. I'm actually going through that with one of my groups right now.
Yeah, it's totally and it's practical. Yeah,
and it's practical, right? We need each other, right? We need to be we're interdependent, and then for the person, just the fear of leaving the group, and the fear of how to that point, can we survive outside of the group? But just what is actually holding me in this group? Is it a deep conviction and a alignment of values and maybe some work we're doing together, or is it literally the fear of leaving that is what is keeping me in this group? So those are some ideas I have around the word cult, and maybe we could then mosey over to religion.
No, that's interesting. See, to me, that's in my own experience within the religious realm, having gone to Protestant Christian churches throughout my life. My mom was born again when I was in her womb. My dad is an atheist and staunchly, adamantly, even sometimes profanely so. But my mom, so I grew up though going to church with my mom, a bunch of different places. To me, the churches where I felt the most adversarial to the entire sort of order of things were those in which my interrogations were received with a manner, I would even just say like a prickliness. I have always asked questions. I've always interrogated just about everything, partially because I'm like, again, like we said, like if someone has an emotional response, I think, and again, I don't know if you validated this, so I don't want to keep saying this, like this is true, but if someone has an emotional response, that your tendency is to go, oh, and like kind of come near them. And my tendency is really. So when people make claims, my tendency generally is really, no matter who they are. And I'm like, I don't know. Especially if something I haven't heard, or they're saying it in a real adamant fashion, I'm like, you seem real adamant. So if you're saying something with that level of conviction, I assume you will be wildly open to all. You've already interrogated this as richly as possible. So any questions I ask wouldn't be provocative, but indeed would be like, oh, I'll be happy to walk you through that. Had those same questions myself, did so. I'd say about 2 times amongst 30, maybe, I don't know, 30, 40 different church scenarios. I'd say like 2, maybe 2 or 3 over like a 30-year span was in certain churches where after 3 or 4 layers of questioning, people got tense and weird. And I was like, this is not okay. This is not good. This is religion to me malfunctioning. Now there's you need some sort of order in terms of like in the middle of like you're conducting a service or whatever for me to stand up and be like, I have some questions. You're like, I understand you're trying to, it's not super appropriate to interrupt a TED talk, right? So that's kind of what a sermon is. But generally that's where churches are like kind of seen as generally like the worst, right? I wasn't able to ask questions. And I see many people who have left the church, and so many of them say, like 80% of the people say, it's because I wasn't allowed to ask questions. I asked questions, people started treating me weird and just being like, no. And I was like, you can't even ask questions. That's not even making statements that, yes, you could decide are heresy, which means, okay, the things you're saying are literally contrary to what we believe here. So we're going to ask you not to be a part of this because you're not a part of this. I can understand that with any group, right? You're like, I have to ask you to leave the group because you do not believe in the principles of the group. Totally reasonable. This is how we send people to prison, right? It makes sense, but not the way that we send people to prison. We both have problems with that, but you know what I mean? But yeah, not being able to ask a question to me is very cult-like, because then it's even more cult-like than not even trying to leave. That even if you're just trying to go, oh, what's up with that? And people are like, blocking in 5, 4, 3, 2. And we saw an example of this. Maybe we'll talk about this in a different episode, but there was a senatorial or something, right? Senator Josh Hawley was asking questions of a law professor, Dr. Bridges, and he was asking questions about trans identification, I guess, essentially. And then she immediately accused him of being transphobic. And we're not going to go fully into that, but I just like that was an example of that provoked this idea. And I've had this in my same thing, asking people questions and they shut me down or start calling me names very quickly. And sort of that woman then called him name, like literally called him a name that wasn't factual. She called him transphobic in that case, and which is an irrational fear of trans-identifying people, and none of his questions illuminated in an irrational fear of anything. He seemed pretty calm or whatever. I was just asking a question. So to me, anything you can't ask a question of is like, that does get into the cult realm of, no, questions are verboten. Or, and this is why I question too, this like emotional labor concept of like, is that, I don't know, is that just a different version of refusing to answer a question? I tend to think if people won't answer a question or will shut you down for questioning, is they don't have an answer to the question. That's my assumption. In which case, then why am I going to believe anything that they're saying? Then I don't even believe that they believe what they're saying. You know, and that's what I felt like in Christian churches too. I was like, are these people even Christians? Like, if they won't stand up to my asking questions of them about Jesus said this or Jesus said that, and why is this? Then I was like, do they even believe in God then? If they're just like, no, you can't ask God that, you know? I was like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And I know we decided not to go deep or at least play the clip, but briefly, that clip is interesting to me because I have trained a woke part of me, and that's what I want to actually examine partially.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And so the woke part was like, oh yeah, like white man in power interrogating what appeared to be a Black woman.
Yeah.
And the power dynamics there, I think, are imbalanced. And so that part of me is, understands that half of how people reacted. And I think that's one of the things that fascinated you, right? As you actually scanned through all the comments and you were like, wow, this one clip actually provoked kind of almost equally these two, totally oppositional interpretations.
Yeah. Fully. Yeah. Opposite direction.
And I take a step back and I'm like, well, I don't even 100% understand what the hearing was, what it was part of, but the reality is that it was a hearing. Like, that's the deal. Like, if you're there in that environment, you are being questioned.
Yeah. You're giving testimony. Yeah.
You're giving testimony.
Yeah.
And it kind of, goes back to the thing I said at the very beginning. Like, I think not all questions are in good faith. And that's certainly true of some things I've seen happen in hearings as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So, yeah.
But even a bad faith question, if you can answer it, I guess to me, my default always is answer the question. I don't know. But again, we talked about this last week too, that I believe in the lasso of truth, Wonder Woman theory, that if someone asks you a question, you do your best to answer it truthfully. This is just how human beings speak. So then you're basically like, well, communication is that's not how I walk through the world. But I also have an borderline indefatigable energy for answering questions. And I know a lot of people don't. My stepfather is a great example of you ask him 2-3 questions when he would get home from work and he would be like losing his mind.
And then there's me, where I might answer the question 4 hours later, but I'll answer
it. I'll answer it. Yeah. I'll answer 16 other questions before I answer a question, but you're getting some answers, dude.
And this, I think weaves into a couple of other pieces. So something about that to me is about having an agenda, and that's certainly viable. That's certainly true of activists. Hopefully we have an agenda. Otherwise, what are we acting for?
What are we doing?
And it's, I think, it's the question of when does that activism, when is that actually moving the agenda forward, and when is that actually, standing in the way of a constructive conversation?
Yeah.
And one of the, I guess, I was grateful because I went to a workshop many years ago by Surge, showing up for racial justice here in Chicago. And it was when I was really starting to dig into, racism in particular. And it was called Ally as a Verb. I'm really grateful that was one of my kind of foundational pillars, because the whole, and I swear to God, it took me halfway through the workshop to even understand what it meant. And that's because there's this attraction to the label. There's this attraction, especially with the word ally. And there's a shit ton of pushback to that. And I understand why, because it can be quite performative just to pick up the label and to self-diagnose and say, well, I'm an ally. Whereas it can take away the emphasis on, well, how are you an ally, or what are you actually doing day to day to be an ally, or have you just kind of picked up the term? Is the main point there. And so, even the word ally is, I'd say, largely controversial. There are some folks I really respect that use it, like Dr. David Camp with the White Ally Toolkit. I think allyship it's a word I've used in some of my workshops. It's I think a slightly safer ground in the context of like that implies motion, that implies action, a way of being, if you will, a commitment to ongoing work, perhaps. But you could argue linguistically that that's really splitting hairs.
What is because that's not a term that exists in my world at all. I see people using it and I understand what it means, like in classic semantics, but like, what are you like? Allies to me has this strange sense of remove. So I'm trying to examine today with the presupposition that woke, the sort of quote unquote woke, and I know, again, I know for some people that seems diminutive, and I don't mean it in that sense. I just mean this is a term that we can both use, that everyone kind of knows generally what we're talking about. I don't mean it as an insult. I'm just trying to use it for whatever, the simplicity of conversation. But looking as woke as religion, ally has this strange thing where it seems separate from whatever fundamentally is going on. Like it has, to me, a bit of like a Jew and Gentile kind of, it seems to have a binary where you, as an ally, you are outside of the actual thrust of the religion in some ways, right? That you aren't, just like, for example, like the allies were the people who came to, defend a country, right? Or Ukraine or whatever. Like we ally with Ukraine against Russia, but it's really Ukraine's conflict. So that means we're secondary. We're really outside of a thing, just kind of supporting something else that's happening. And that part is, I don't even really know what it means. Like why? I guess that's the question. Why would you even ever want to identify yourselves as an ally instead of I'm part of the central thing? I guess there's no corollary to Christianity with that one. So I don't even know how to frame it in terms of my own, like, there's no one for one. There's no version of Christianity where you're like, not a Christian, but I'm with you. I guess there is, but I don't know who those people are. Like I'm for Christian value. Maybe Jordan Peterson's a great example. Actually, he's an ally of Christianity. He is pro biblical, pro like Christian ethos, but he is not a Christian. He's whatever, agnostic or whatever. He's not that. So I suppose that would be a version, but he wouldn't say that. I guess. So is that kind of what it means, or does it mean something different?
So let's do this. Let's attempt to define ally, woke, and religion, because I don't know that we've actually done that yet.
Woohoo! Yeah. I have religion pulled up on the old Oxford English Dictionary.
We're coning. Well, I do think that's part of the challenge with ally. Is both a little more hands off than it ought to be to, I think, be meaningful, and as I was saying, like more focused on like the label or the identity than necessarily the work. One of the challenges, I have with it, an upgrade to that might be, an accomplice is I think there's various ways.
I've heard that. I've heard that.
The ally continuum, and things like that. And
so provocative. It's so provocative though, because it's criminal. It's a criminal term.
That's my association, right? And it is because I think we're living in, maybe we always have like a corrective period. Like to me, that's what activism is. Like, oh, here's the thing I want to see shifted or
change,
in the world. And so even there, like I guess the main thing the way it attaches to wokeness for me is this piece of, can I call myself that? or
Hmm.
do I, is it really only if somebody I have allied with or been an accomplice with, it's
Hmm.
only when they designate me so. And again, even that's getting tangled up
Oh
in like,
yeah.
does it even matter? Does the label even matter? And
Yeah.
that's the whole thing around, early on, I was one of my mentors in anti-racism was like, you don't do it for cookies. You'll never get any cookies. Nobody's ever gonna give any cookies. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay. So I kind of accepted that.
People do. That's, I mean, this is not true, but people do give, I
No,
have to
they do.
imagine
They
people
do.
literally bring cookies to
Oh, actual
the,
cookies.
yeah,
Well, that's
you probably show up at certain meetings and they literally give you cookies for identifying with their ethos. But
but
yes,
this idea of like
don't do it for it. Yeah.
never giving an accolade or never
Yeah.
rewarding,
Yeah.
there's some pieces of this that to me reveal just kind of a lack of understanding about human motivation and psychology. And it
Yeah.
does seem to, there's a piece of this, and I'm doing a piss poor job of actually defining, sticking to the structure I just mentioned. But there's a piece of this that seems valuable in terms of interrogation of
Yeah.
concepts and terms and behaviors, and then there's a piece of this that starts to feel like it's actually working against progress. And
Hmm.
so, for me, woke, I would say, is most fundamentally about awareness.
Hmm.
And that could apply quite broadly, like I was saying about consciousness work. Like, am I really
Yeah.
aware of my body? Am I aware of my thoughts? Am I aware of where they came from? And in
Yeah.
the 21st century, Lord knows the science of programming us has become
Oh my gosh.
incredibly refined. I was
Yeah.
at a talk a few years ago, and there was a decision scientist. That's a whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even a few years ago, she was up there saying she estimated 90% of her decisions and thoughts were programmed by some,
Yeah.
whatever corporation or media or
Yeah.
whatnot.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, a huge piece of it. And
Yeah.
that's one of the like kind of pieces of cognitive dissonance around how you operate, meeting quote unquote woke culture, because I see you digging really deep and
Yeah.
doing research and actually reading the bill, which I know I still haven't read it.
No, it's only one page. Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
come on, man, I'm busy.
Come on. I got stuff.
I lost it. So yeah, in a way, like, you are really deeply committed. I think we both are in different ways, but I see you being really committed to actually kind of looking at what's under it and looking under the surface. And then I'm hearing that's often when you get blocked, which to me goes back to that definition of cult, because it's essentially like we're recognizing you aren't in this cult, and so we're gonna well then, and that to me is the thing that's made it very religious, where I'm like, okay, because woke doesn't, I would agree in general, that's what I thought woke meant, like years ago or whatever. And I, for years, always like to use the branding from this group. This is not related to woke, but they were called the Wide Awakes. It's like during Lincoln's day. They just had great branding. I tried to name an improv troupe about it like 15 years ago or whatever. So I like the language. So when people started saying woke, literally people called me, I've been called woke, literally like probably 7 or 8 years ago though. They're like, you're woke, you get it. You know what I'm saying? And then I was like, well, I like it. And then I'm being awakened, I'm wide awake. The Bible is replete with language like that says we're all born spiritually dead. The Holy Spirit of God moves on us through belief in Christ, and then you become alive. Literally, it's sort of you wake up or you become spiritually alive for the first time in your life, that sort of thing. So like it's all in there. It's all very religious language, that sort of thing. But I think what I keep confronting is, in its current form, and I don't know who these people are, whether they're and this is the ally question. This is if they're representative in any way of the movement, quote unquote, or of the religion. But people who then don't seem aware, because almost every single person I talk to and then go, okay, well, what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And then I found this, and this. And then they're like, get out of here. You're hateful, essentially. And so I'm like, well, wait a second. It seems then you're not aware. So you're not like you're a false convert or whatever. You know what I mean? That's like same thing with Christian. And this is what I do with Christians my entire life. You're like, oh, you're a Christian? You're like, oh, cool. And then you start having conversations, but if something comes up and they say something weird, you don't go, all right, that's different from how I think. I'll just be quiet about that. You don't. Of course not. Why would you? If you love somebody, you'd be like, oh, well, wait a second. Why are you saying that? And you start interrogating and then kind of ascertain. And again, this is not for the purposes of
I have any authority to excommunicate a fellow Christian. But if you're just going, oh, okay, wait, are we in the same tribe? Are we on the same page? Are we talking about the same thing? Or are we using these labels differently? And I think that's the thing, is like woke doesn't seem very awakened, just in my personal experience, where people can't stand up to interrogation and don't have answers for any of my questions, in which case I'm like, well, that's not very aware. Like if you're less aware than I am in the 27 minutes of us having this conversation, then I don't think I think you're still asleep, essentially. But wait, I want to go to ally though. Sorry, I still have one question about ally, and I think because I think it might get to the same point. Like, is an ally mean ally to like a person or a group of people, or is it ally to an ethos or like ideology? That's what I was trying to. I don't know what it is.
Maybe all the above. I usually think of it more interpersonally, but that's kind of my disposition. And in fact, that's even the way I just described woke a second ago, which I want to expand.
Yeah.
So I would say, probably more importantly, it is being an ally to a movement, being an ally to justice. You could say being an ally to.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So wait. So everyone's an ally. Like in that sense, everyone's an ally to the movement. There's no people who are the movement, and then there's ally. So it's not like an ally term in like a military sense.
No, it could be very specific. Like say you're at a protest. One of the strategies is to put white bodies up front, because the police are less likely to hurt them, or even if they do, like there's a sense of, well, that's that's one thing we can do as white allies, let's say, is use our bodies.
Oh, okay. All right. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's okay. That is okay. So it is separate then. You're separate in the because an ally is separate from a division, right? So in the military, you have, let's just say in the old, because I don't know enough about the military, in old school military, right? You have like infantry, and you have, archers, and you have horsemen or whatever. And so all in that case, you're basically functioning as a shield holders, right? So you're just still part of the army. You're part of the Roman army, right? They had shield holders, right? And then they had archers and stuff. So you're just saying, oh, we're shield holders. But if you're an ally, you're actually separate. You're not part of you're not part of the military. You're not part of the army. So you're saying you're separate, but you're part of you're joined with. You know what I'm saying? That's the weird thing about ally. I find it a very disturbing term, because I'm like, well, ally to what though? What do you mean? How are you not that?
Well,
maybe I'm too new agey. Where I'm we're all people. We're all stardust, man.
Well, and there is a piece of that that's really important. So there's a couple of things I want to get to. One is I just do want to. I was talking about being woke is really like an internal awareness, and that is extraordinarily important. And it's something I see missing in a lot of activist spaces, as I've spent years doing a lot of my own deep work and healing. I'm trained as a coach, so I do understand a lot of like what that is to transform internally. And the other part of woke is understanding history as best we can, like really not kind of settling for, I don't know, what the history we learned, I think growing up, which I feel like was incomplete. And so that's the other big piece of it, is really, reading Baldwin, reading and going back and understanding those things better, more about our society and our culture and how we came to be here and how these things have been going on. And of course, there's no actual consensus about any of that either. So a lot of different pieces. But what you're getting at too, I would just label as collective liberation, which is, I think, an important term, and it's really in some level of debate in one of the activist groups that I'm in right now. And there a lot of, it's hard, I think, for people generally to hold two opposing ideas, and that's a lot of the, I think, the consciousness work that I've done is to try to be in the contradiction. I think that's a lot of what we're actually avoiding, is being in something that's deeply contradictory and maybe has no simple answer. I mean, like abortion is a good example of that, I think, based on everything and our conversation. But collective liberation, the idea is, one of the ways, speaking as a white man, is, I believe our culture is really quite sick generally. I just think you could look at so many measures, whether that's the disparities in life expectancy. We've talked about obesity, opioid epidemic. Take your pick. We use something like 2.5 Earths of resources every year. like, wow, we are just kind of spoiled brats, I think, right now, rolling around, in it. And so this idea of collective liberation says the problem, and I think maybe this is what you're getting at with ally, is that it also separates me from the idea that I need to be healed and I need to be liberated, because the way we've set up this culture isn't serving me either. And you could look at specific stats around like white male suicide or even life expectancy and whatnot. So
we're right in that slot. I realized I'd forgotten that we're in the slot. We're the most suicide prone categorized people in the United States.
Yeah, and I could riff on that for a long time, and I think the thing I think that we ought to try to hold both, or maybe more than both, lots of things simultaneously, is what does it mean to be collectively liberated? We don't, to the extent we even want to use a term like social justice. I just finished a really beautiful coursework in that, and they one of the teachers who I really respect, Rev Angel Kyoto Williams, just said, look, we don't know, none of us actually knows what it looks like to live in an equitable, socially just society. We haven't achieved that yet. And I love that, because
no one does.
Part of the problem with how I perceive, wokeness or woke culture is kind of an insinuation that we do. That like, this is the right way, this is the right language, this is the right, way to do it. And there was she had an really unbelievable way of kind of holding that that's not exactly true, because none of us know that, while also not throwing it all out. I think that's the other tendency, is just to be like, oh, that's not right, so let's just throw it all out, it's meaningless. There is value there. There's a tremendous body of work around that. There's a lot of unpacking of, I think, truths and stories they're valuable. And the last thing I want to weave in to this piece is just that, I have been very attracted to that idea, and I think this is where I have to look at my own psychology. It's human nature to, well, first of all, be in tribes, right? Like that's just so it may be the most fundamental piece, right? Around belonging, we need each other, we need to be in tribes to survive. So that's a big piece of it. And in fact, actually, I was at a thing yesterday about compassion in policing, and I was talking to a police officer, and he was saying that gangs in Chicago, gang attendance increased during COVID because we took away every other avenue they had for socialization. So that just popped in my mind. But this, I will admit, I have been extremely attracted to woke culture. Some of that, I think, was my own like self-flagellation of like, oh God, I'm an awful white man, and so some of this, and when I say things like this, it's because I've done a lot of work to unpack my subconscious. It's not that I necessarily profess these things or want to believe them, but I say they're true because I've done some work. And I would say, yes, I was attracted to these things because it did feel like it feels good to have power. It feels good to be one of the good ones, so to speak. And I don't think I am. I want to be really clear there. I don't think it's important to go around saying I'm one of the good ones. I don't think that's true. I think we're unpacking such deep cultural phenomena that there really is no being a good one, other than maybe just being in the game of interrogation, like I think we both are. Like that's maybe the only way to be a quote unquote good one. It's not about, the problem with that idea of being a good one is just checking a box. Anytime we're checking a box and saying, oh, I'm done, we've given up, right? And we've settled.
Well, and I think that's why this whole idea of asking questions, literally interrogating, and even interrogating, right? Interrogating doesn't really suggest good faith, but because it's an intense, and it's not looking to it's looking to figure some things out. You know what I mean? It's not looking to just explore or open, liberally communicate our things. It's like, no, 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 let's get to the flipping bottom of this. We need to be serious, right? Which is part of the thing that pervades religion in general, but wokeism as well. I was just talking about this morning in my devotion. There's this, so similar, again, all of that stuff you're describing is wildly religious, right? Essentially, the all this is in Christianity, right? All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. It means we're all damaged. All creation, this is the whole story of the fall, right? So humankind chooses self-governance over obedience to God, and all things are ruptured. Everything is broken, everything is messed up. Oh no, what do we do about it? And this is where religion comes in, right? This is essentially more or less what every single religion on the planet believes, which is things aren't the way they should. Things are not ideal, and things should be ideal. Some part of us is like, things should be better than the way they are, which is a fascinating revelation that happened around the world. And that's because things are jacked up. Every society in human history has had things they did good and things they did poorly, but they never did things perfectly, ever. And yet some part of us is like, maybe we can, which is, I mean, it's really all about perfectionism, chasing perfectionism, ultimately, knowing we're going to fail. And then what all religions propose is, here is the method of solution. And I would say what all religions propose is, statistically all, here is the only way of solution. So like, and then it invites us, and it is exciting. I mean, I say this as a Christian or whatever, that like the box that I get to check is through Christ's perfection, in his sacrifice, my penalty for my imperfection is dealt with, and then his perfection is sort of imputed to me. So the box is checked of like, okay, well then I'm not abiding under God's wrath anymore. It's kind of what the Bible talks about, being children of wrath. And so you become a child of God. But then it says, so that's really the doneness, and it's not my action. So it's nothing special about me or identity about me, or there's no way for me to earn it. It's impossible because I've failed in it. I've tried and failed. However, there's this whole thing about faith without works is dead. So then out of the enthusiasm for that box checked, I then engage in the work, right? I go set about being, it says, the Bible says, like being the hands and feet of God, or Christ's hands and feet. So you go set about to do the work. And then if you aren't doing the work, then it's kind of revelatory for the fact that you really don't even have the faith to begin with, if you're not engaged in some level of repair of this world. And that's hugely exciting. Now, I resist naturally the tribalistic impulse, and I've had to really strive, and I only do it out of obedience to the Bible, because it says, do not forsake as some have the gathering together. And I just kept reading that when I was just reading the Bible. I kept coming to that verse, and I was like, wait, how did I end up here? I was just looking at something else. And so I was like, okay, I got to gather together with people and do it, because I definitely tend much more into like, I admired Ronin as a kid. I wanted to like be a samurai or Wolverine. This like lone wolf idea was like what I'm super into. Mostly because of these interactions. When I come and gather and try to really do the work intensely with people of examining, I reject. And again, this is about my fear of rejection or fear of being cast out of the tribes, because I've literally been cast out of many, many tribes, kicked out of friend groups, asked to leave churches. And my mom is like this too. So this is multi-generations of people being asked to leave groups. And then being blocked on a regular basis, when, as far as I can tell, I know I can do it in an antagonistic way. And I am not, I don't have those empathic concerns. But interrogation, I thought, was at least essentially what we're all up to. But anyway, I say all this to be like, say all those things about Christianity, because I was like, I think there's so many kinships with the fundamental sort of like woke religion we're talking about. And I say all this too, again, in order to profess my own religious inclinations, so as not, I think a lot of times when people like criticize wokeness, again, this is part of the problem. People are like, oh, because you hate it. You know what I mean? You hate improvement. Nope, don't at all. I'm fully religious, and so I get it. And I think if people saw wokeness as a religion, people inside of any sort of movement there are like, oh, okay, well, I'm functioning on a religious basis, which means I know some of my suppositions are faith-based. They're not evidence-based. You know what I mean? They should at least be reason-based. I don't think there's anything, but if you're wrestling like you're talking about with this sort of overarching perfection truth, this is like for a Christian, knowing the mind of God. We do everything God says, but to say that we fully know what God is up to is insane, because he's an infinite creator being, right? And we're finite creatures. So we're sort of grasping, and sometimes vainly, sometimes surely, but we're heading the right direction, hopefully. So then to see that in wokeness, I think be really helpful for people within the thing to be like, oh, okay, well, I'm a religious person, and that's helpful for me to frame this. And it'd be super helpful for people who are antagonistic to wokeness to not just be like, what is wrong with you? Because where I see a lot of the conflict is people are like, you're questioning reality, you know? And so then if you ask questions about the reality that someone within that religion holds, this is where I start to think it's cultish. Then hostility is the response, insult, dismissal. Whereas if we realize that it's a religion, then there are a lot of fundamental agreements about religions. Hostilities will arise, but we don't need to foster them, and we certainly don't want to go to them quickly. You know what I mean? You want to at least find a place of like, well, there will be commonalities. There's places where we can work together, like talk about mutuality, right? There are places when interfaith coalitions are appropriate. And I totally get it. There are also a ton of places where interfaith coalitions are completely inappropriate, because it would be syncretistic and literally damage the whole thing of like, this is the way, because you're going to be heading different directions.
Yeah. A couple of threads I want to pick up. One is quite some time ago, gosh, almost 20 years ago, I guess. I dated somebody who was in Methodist seminary, who you met at an Austin City Limits music festival. And it was very helpful, because I think I was a bit I don't know, I grew up very open-minded. I would say I was neutral to the side of leaning on like anti, I don't know, religion in general and Christianity, just because I had a lot of false assumptions about it. I assumed that it actually was trying to be held as an absolute truth and sort of a cult. And she actually really helped me see that that's, at least through the Methodist lens, not true. That in fact, I think I was talking to her about faith, and she was like, well, questioning faith is part of faith.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. That's the deal. And so that was helpful to sort of unpack that and sort of soften that and make me even more curious. And she bought me like the Oxford annotated edition of the Bible.
Oh, hardcore. Yeah. That's academic, dude. Yeah.
Well, yeah, because I was just like, there's just so many contradictions and I don't understand. It's just like, well, here's the one where they've given you some, shortcuts.
Yeah.
So a couple other things I wanted to weave in is just, I spoke briefly to it, but just again, getting into like the psychology of this, I think, it, and this is where I wish maybe more activists and maybe more people in religion and maybe just everybody just had more self-awareness around what was happening in our brains, like the brain science. In fact, just yesterday at that seminar, I was exposed to yet another kind of flavor of like how we can use brains, neuroscience and brain science to make sense of how we act together and where fear comes from and why. So anyway, like, why does power feel good? Well, I think it can make us feel safe, even if I do think sometimes there's a trade-off. Really, I think the antagonism and the separation at like on an individual basis and a micro level actually makes us less safe at a macro level, because then we are less resilient. And I know this is something you're deeply committed to, is like the art of conversation, certainly maybe the art of argument and dialogue. Because that actually brings us closer together, because we're in tension together. Whereas when we refuse to do that, or we're incapable of doing that, or we just like drop the portcullis on each other, that I do believe makes us less resilient at large, because then
commute socially, and
then we're factioned, and then we're socially divided. But at the individual level, and coming at the brain science, like I think self-righteousness can feel really good. It can feel like I've got the right answer, like, and that makes me feel good at some level. It can soothe these fear mechanisms in our, what we often say is the reptilian brain. Although having an iguana for 23 years, I want to change that. I don't.
Not as illuminative of this whole concept as it would have seemed. So
I think those are the couple pieces I wanted to drop in. Just
I like it. I like those pieces. Well, and the self-righteousness is fantastic too, because that this is why this is the again another like reason I see, or the way in which I see woke as a religion is woke, similar to Christianity, for example, which is again the religion of my most experience. So I'll just keep speaking from that framework. There is no self-righteousness in the Christian worldview. It's literally, that would be it would be explicit contradiction. So that would be like a heretical thing, right? That would be like, oh yeah, you can't call we can't call you a Christian anymore if you proclaimed yourself self-righteous. It's literally the exact opposite. It says like we have no capacity within ourselves to be righteous. So it literally, the righteousness then comes from an external source, much like the Greeks, whatever, had logos, right? There was like, that's where full truth is. It exists, but it's outside of us. All we can do is kind of scrabble at it, right? So we can aim ourselves at absolute righteousness in as much as we understand it, but we ourselves are sort of syncretistic beings, meaning we're blended fabrics, right? There's this, Paul, the Apostle Paul says it this way in his letters. He's like, that which I will to do, I do not do, and that which I will not to do, I do. Oh, wretched man that I am, which I think is fundamental to the human condition. I've never seen a true contradiction to this, that there are aspects, certainly in my life, of like being enlivened by the Holy Spirit to desire to please God, and yet there are certainly aspects of myself that desire to please myself. And there are, or some people even look at this as like the wolf you feed is the one that grows. There's a wolf, there's a sort of a good wolf and a bad wolf, kind of thing. But likewise, woke, I think, is very similar, where it does seem to, where it says that which has things I've examined and looked at and blah, blah, reasoned through, but the righteousness that comes from outside of myself is ultimately the kind of righteousness I'm following. And maybe where we get into trouble interpersonally is where it says like my proper adjudication of that external righteousness can cause you to bristle. You're like, no, I've got it right. No, I've got it right. You know what I mean? That sort of thing. But in both cases are referring to something that is an absolute external right. You know what I mean? Like just like that person was talking about, where it's like, well, there is an absolute that we're chasing, but to say that any of us know it absolutely would be silly. You know what I mean? And that's where I think it can get really damaging, right? Is when people start to be like, well, no, it's about me. This is like the whole faith without works is dead thing. But faith has to precede works, or else you're just doing works. Like a works-based righteousness does not exist in the Christian canon. Like it's antithetical to Christianity, which is fascinating if you look at the United States for all tons of ways in which Christianity has influenced this culture. But oh my goodness, did the US culture not get that flipping memo? Like, oh my works-based, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
works-based obsession, right?
Oh, there's, I'm sure, at least a whole episode about Christianity versus what I, for now, would call Christ consciousness and maybe the true teachings. And yeah, so yeah, I'm sure you could go way deeper on that. One thing I know we need to land here soon, but I did want to come back because I don't think I completed the thought about kind of holding multiple truths or multiple questions in the context of collective liberation. And one of the challenges there is really, who are we centering? And one of the ways one of the compass or North Star mechanisms is who's closest to the pain. So I think that, because that might not always be the people we sort of stereotypically imagine it might be. Or it may change based on the who's in the room or what kind of part of the society we're looking at, and the very real controversy in one of my activist groups right now is this balance between healing ourselves as people with more power and privilege in this society, which I do think is deeply important, if not really the main piece that will liberate us. And also being in, we could say, allyship, being in community, being in solidarity is probably a better word for all of that. Standing in solidarity, I think, is maybe something I use myself and feel like is just that. And again, going back to kind of your questions around the word ally and separation, to me, that is maybe it's a better word, because I think it's like, oh, I'm standing here with you. Your pain and your fight isn't exactly mine. in the sense of me as an individual, but
Yeah.
it is because we're here together and I'm standing in solidarity with you.
Yeah.
And actually I just happened to see it in my grandmother's hands, but this feels like a really relevant quote from James Baldwin. White people have quite enough to do in learning how to accept and love themselves and each other. And when they have achieved this, the ego problem will no longer exist, for it will no longer be needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you can, yeah, exactly. If you recognize the internal problem, you don't have to point any fingers accusing anyone else of causing said problem. Well, this is what I like about the universality of original sin in the Christian worldview, which is like it's literally everybody. You know what I mean? And so that was my question too. Was like, wait, in solidarity, is the solidarity in that concept religiously? Is it mutual solidarity, or is it again? Are there? This is the way. Okay, there's a lot of ways in which woke certainly is religion, and it's very similar to the Christian religion in a bunch of different ways. But one way I think it's actually much more similar to Hinduism is there appears to be a caste system within it. So is that kind of like, so when you're saying in solidarity, like, are you sort of in solidarity as a I mean, in some way, and this is to me the scariest part of woke, but I think we'll get into more of this on the intersectionality episode in the future, maybe next week. But like, it feels sometimes like, I don't know all the names of the castes, but the highest one is Brahmin, right? So if that's closest to the pain, that's closest to sanctified, essentially. And then you as an untouchable can't really touch. I mean, you can kind of come alongside them. And I know that's the bottom and the top, and I know there's a bunch of ones in between, but whatever. I'll try to learn more about the caste system. But it feels Hindu, it feels caste-like, where you're actually separate. You're on separate trajectories. And but is that accurate? Is that just me trying to analyze something from the exterior?
There are absolutely power structures. There is power to be derived from obviously wealth and heritage and land, and the things we can usually point out, I think, for power and privilege. And power can be derived from victim identity and other and perhaps being closer to the pain. So
interesting.
I hesitate to call that a caste system, maybe at least partially just because it's not consistent. I mean, that shifts. I mean, a lot of, at least in my experience, a lot of this phenomenon of wokeness is also connected with intentionally decentralized communities, anarchist communities. So that's an interesting intersection, right? Where most of my problems with quote unquote religion are with organized religion, and that we can unpack a lot more probably in the future. So in this way, it's like maybe it's like semi-organized religion, and it's not. There is in one group in particular, I think somebody, I don't even know who, but did a pretty good job of outlining like 4 pages of values and agreements and ways we agree to behave together. And it doesn't to me read quite as much like religious doctrine and like, you must believe this. But there are some pieces of that. There are absolutely some activist components of that. Like, we're fundamentally, like abolitionists, we believe in abolishing the police and prisons and all that.
Or even the belief in privilege, like the belief in privilege for me as an outsider is separate from my worldview. So then to me but it seems ideologically prevalent through multiple groups, just again from the outside. You're far more interior than I am, but that seems like a must. Like you must believe that sort of intersectional power dynamic thing exists. And that's why I say caste, because that's kind of the intersectional wheel or whatever seems to me like just a more complex way of adjudicating caste, essentially. So it's this sense of like almost all relationships have inherent power systems within them, and then there's privilege and oppression. But again, this might be from criticism as opposed to internal definition.
Yeah, maybe what you're getting at is that, like, one of the basic notions is if you have more, power and privilege typically in the world. And I know you're referring to an article I wrote about that, where I quantified having a shit ton of power and privilege as a white man. Then in certain groups, activist groups, maybe people of more marginalized backgrounds, people who are closer to the pain, in those groups were kind of expected to have less power.
Mhm.
and make more space for
Gotcha.
really and actively check ourselves, because we've been trained that we're going to be at the front of the room, we're going to have more power, we're going to be in leadership positions, where
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
maybe that's, I mean, it's true for me, like that's my whole life. I've been in leadership positions, and I've had to reconcile that, like, oh, you know what, I'm sure some of that came from just being a tall white man. I'm sure of it, like
Mhm.
absolutely. Like there was one time I was in a jury duty, and like I just, everybody like looked to me like to be like to lead the thing, and I was like, so that was a time when I was like, really, like I'd really rather just kind of sit here like everybody else and do nothing. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, because privilege is a burden. Yeah, yeah. See,
yeah,
as someone who's not ever been asked to be a leader, but would like to be, and has never been. Um, I think for me, I've had the sort of kind of opposite experience or whatever. Um, so but that's what I was wondering. Like, is that seems to me like a tenet, for example, a tenet of faith, that privilege exists in the way that you're discussing it, and power exists in that dynamic. And I think I only examine that if it is true. I want people to understand that as that's a fundamental aspect of the religion, so people can start going, oh, okay, like I can frame around that religious view, just the same way people would have to understand about Christianity. The Christianity believes that all people are abide naturally under the wrath of God, and all people are spiritually dead. I mean, that's like I'm not in any way blind to the fact I'm saying some super provocative stuff that's going to make people angry. Just the same way, that if you say that everyone has privilege and power in their relational dynamics in the world because of immutable or mutable characteristics, plenty of people hate that. And they're
yeah.
like, you're spitting venom. So that's why I'm saying that out loud. I'll say something that makes people mad, so you can go ahead and say stuff that makes people mad too. But I was like, is that a tenet of the faith? Because it seems to come up a ton.
In that language, I would have to say yes. And one of the interesting things is that it's usually couched in like, well, no, this is objective fact and objective truth.
Right.
And there are, some things we can point to, certainly, that are statistically, valid in terms of disparity and inequity. But it also reminds me of, I was involved with a film company, The Stories of Science.
Yeah.
Well, we told the stories of science. It's called 137 Films. And our last film was about the Creation Museum in Kentucky.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that was a fascinating look at young Earth creationists
Yeah.
using something that looked like science,
Yeah.
and very well produced, like as a museum,
Yeah. Yeah.
really refuting a lot of what I believe is what I've grown up to believe is I don't know, quote unquote actual science or more verifiable science, around geology in particular, just measuring carbon dating, just measuring, how long have things been around. And so I think, like, to me, that could be a whole long thing to unpack as well.
No,
But
but it's really similar. No, what you're talking about is similar, right? Because that's something that no one's observed. Like science, you can't even science 10,000 years ago because no one's observed it and recorded it. But you can. So then there is an absolute truth that exists, and we're all going, well, no, this information says that's true. This is not true, and this information says, you know what I mean? We're all vying. It's similar to what we're talking about. You know what I mean? We're all vying and going, this is legitimate and convincing to me, and this is legitimate convincing to me, or all that sort of stuff. So I think it's a great example.
yeah, and part of the challenge I had with that is they were so immutable. They were so just like, no, this is absolute fact. That our interpretation in particular, right, that relates to the Bible, like our interpretation of the Bible is fact, and then we're going to like design all of this science to kind of back it up, was the way that seemed to me.
Yeah.
Which is not how I think about science. And it also brought up some questions about science being a religion in its own way, and the way we even think about certain ideas there.
Yeah. I think absent the one major feature of being able to give you any ethics or morality, which I think are key. There's no good or bad. There's no good and bad in science, really. You know what I mean? There's poorly executed science, but there's no such thing as right and wrong, really.
So I need to come in for a landing. Any closing thoughts?
Oh, yes. Just to bring it back to the beginning. So when I ask questions of people who I perceive to be woke or woke adjacent, hostility, I'm met with hostility, not even joking, 85 to 90% of the time. You being within the spaces that I would consider whatever, like we listened to that Joe Rogan clip, right? It was like DEI conferences are the,
exactly.
you know, like are the new church. And I was like, you go to that church. So
I guess that makes me a preacher. Yeah.
Right. Hey, or, you know, just a parishioner, who knows, unless you're all empowered, you know, I don't know, maybe you have to be of the Brahmin class to be a preacher. I don't know how that stuff works. But no, but like you've been in those spaces. I know you don't ask questions in the manner that I do. However, you're a curious person and an interrogator. And like, does that happen inside the space? So like, almost like for me, inside the walls of the church, people responding with hostility is enormously troubling. I would assume any Christian, if anyone comes and has questions or challenges for me about Christianity or the Bible or whatever, I've never responded in hostility, certainly not first. People say enough hostile things, I'll certainly get sarcastic or start making jokes, but I won't return hostility for hostility, let alone but get hostile about questions. So to me, that's why I think woke is more functioning as a cult for people, for at least most of the people I interact with. But internally, in the systems yourselves, does that happen inside the walls of the church? Like when you ask questions or go, I don't think that's true, and here's why I don't think that's true, and how is that true, or prove that to me, or blah blah. You know, just like normal things that I would do or we do here.
For the sake of my bladder and my next appointment, I'll answer very succinctly. Hell yes, it happens all the time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, it's a mess. It's nobody. And again, I kind of attach a lot of that to an emotional immaturity of a lot of folks who show up pretty much everywhere, but it's certainly true in activist spaces as well. And
sure.
And some of that is just like there's a clear agenda. Like some of the things I'm even working on professionally, you know, people come in and just, you know, shred it, you know, versus I think have a more constructive, and that is usually because there was some pre-existing axe to grind or confirmation bias or attitude that to them seemed completely incompatible with what was happening or what we were trying to build. Yeah. And that's unfortunate because I think there was, from my point of view, there was actually a lot more compatibility in terms of what we were trying to do.
Yeah. So people do the questioning, but then do people react hostilely is the part to answer before you have to go pee yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And that's,
okay.
To me, that's the hostility. I usually read it as like an emotional trigger.
Yeah.
And then a lack of regulation or ability to be in that or move, or maybe a lack of permission to pause. Hey, that's my mug today. Time for a pause. So that's a lot of like what I'm focused on is just can we build better spaces together that allow for more of that, more dimensions and dynamics to show up.
All right. Well, let's pause in gratitude.
Right.
I appreciate you. I love you. Thank you for asking questions and answering questions. And at least here in this nebulous, what's that? You had a great liminal. We're kind of in a liminal space together, and little to no hostility.
Love you. See you soon.
Love you, buddy.
Bye.